The subject of our lesson today is courage, and courage in the sense of bravery and boldness. But there is another character trait that can stand in the way of courage, cautiousness. It tends to safety and therefore avoids any danger or threat. If the cautiousness is overdone, it will control the person with the spirit of fear. And the indications of overcaution include anxiety, shyness, fearfulness, timidity, cowardice, panic, powerlessness, indecision, instability, and so on. Our life experiences show that these burdens depress our society, but also God's people to a certain extent. So let's give a few thoughts about courage. Let's start with Joshua chapter 1, verse 9. Joshua chapter 1, verse 9. Have not I commanded thee? Be strong and of a good courage. Two things, be strong and of a good courage. Be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed, for the Lord thy God is with thee, with us wherever thou goest. The brethren, these scriptures mentions two terms that are important in our lesson. The Hebrew word kavzak means, the first one means to strengthen, prevail, harden, be strong, become strong, or be courageous, be firm, grow firm, be resolute. And the second one, the second word, Hebrew word, means to be strong, alert, courageous, brave, stout, bold, solid, or hard. Like any good characteristic, courage can also be misunderstood. Is the true courage somewhat presumptuous, somewhat cheeky or arrogant, or is it perhaps conceited, boastful, or daredevil? No, definitely no. Courage is not rash, not reckless or thoughtless. It might be defined as a sober, fearless, brave, and self-forgetful attitude of our mind, heart, and will, and of course, in the presence of danger. Sober, fearless, brave, and self-forgetful attitude of mind, heart, and will in the presence of danger. In line with this definition, we can say, if danger were not present in a situation, we would not think courage to characterize one facing the pertinent situation. If in the ordinary circumstances, we go to get groceries, we go to the store to buy them, it is a brave act? No. But was getting food during war in a concentration camp of Nazi regime, for example, a courageous act? Yes, because it was associated with danger, even with mortal danger. According to this definition, the true courage is an attitude of our mind, heart, and will. In its mind, a courageous person ponders the various dangers. It studies, owns abilities, and compares these with the abilities of the enemy in a certain situation and analyzes and assesses the threat. There is no sobriety in courage. Our heart, we know it is a spring, a source of feelings. There is no place for anxiety in a brave heart. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, says Paul in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. Courage does not allow fright or scare, dread or apprehension, dismay, consternation or panic to rule over us in the face of impending danger. Our will is an ability to consciously control, to direct our way of thinking and acting. It is our decision center. Of course, it is our natural inclination to protect ourselves from danger, but the courageous will is brave and fearless. Its decisions are clear. It does not waver. It is not unstable. It wants to prevail. Brethren, there are 4 kinds of courage which correspond to all our spheres of life. The physical, of course, mental, the moral sphere, and religious sphere. 4 kinds. Physical courage braves, of course, physical danger. And various exploits in the ancient wars can be an illustration of this. We remember that Gideon chose only the 3,000 bravest men from the Israelite army and defeated the surplus army of the enemy. We remember also the heroic deeds of Samson against the Philistines, or of David against the giant warrior Goliath. Mental courage is the quality to bravely deal with matters that are difficult to understand. And a courageous person ponders complex issues, directs its thoughts in risky areas, and touches on problematic facts. Several scholars and thinkers could be mentioned here. Of course, we know the scientist Galileo Galilei. He lived at the turn of the 16th and 17th centuries. At that time, the Catholic Church described the universe with Earth as a fixed center. And despite the danger from the Inquisition, Galileo dared to reflect on this worldview. Later, we know he agreed with Copernicus and probably said about the Earth, and yet it moves. And for this sentence, he spent the rest of his life in house arrest. Jesus is, of course, a great example of mental courage. When he went into the wilderness after his baptism, he pondered various aspects of the divine revelations. Understanding about this led to many, many conflicts with Judaism at the time. Apostle Paul, he's another fine example of mental courage. Jews put emphasis on justification by works of the law. However, Paul considered without fear God's grace in justification by faith and set them both in contrast to each other. Martin Luther, he did the same. The Roman Church preached the doctrine of work righteousness for centuries. And he, as a doctor of the theological faculty, he dared to study Rome's teachings and compared them with the Bible. As a result, we know he challenged the views of many, many theologians in this regard. There is also moral courage. human beings, we all have consciences. Consciences. It is a moral quality to distinguish between good and bad, wrong and right. And moral courage heroically faces moral challenges. This kind of courage operates in a specific situation when it is easier to do wrong or when it is unfavorable to do right. Example, what would we do in a store if a cashier gave us too much change? Would we point it out to them, or would we just put the money in our wallet and go home in peace? The fourth kind, the noblest kind of courage is, of course, religious courage. Religio or religio comes from Latin and means religiosity, piety, reverence, or honor for God. So religious courage, therefore, always has to do with godliness when circumstances are difficult or dangerous. And both Bible and history of God's people furnish us many, many examples of this form of courage. We remember the young boy Samuel. The priest Heli, he was his provider and teacher. And unfortunately, Heli's sons did many things bad and wrong. But Heli accepted this and did not admonish them. The Lord revealed Samuel that for this, they all would suffer God's judgment. Did Samuel hide this message for fear of Heli? Although he was afraid at first, yes, but he later bravely declared God's message to Heli, who finally said, we know this sentence, yes, he is Jehovah. He does what is good in his eyes. We can read about this in 1 Samuel chapters 2 and 3. The prophet Nathan, he lived in the time of King David. David sinned with Bathsheba and was also responsible for her husband's death. Nathan told him a figurative story and made David realize that he himself is the main character of this story. Although David, as Israel's king, could condemn Nathan to death, he risked his life. He did not hesitate and courageously presented God's decision to David. David recognized his sins and turned to God with repentance. We can read about this in 2 Samuel chapters 11 and 12. So I have already said about Jesus that his views were often in conflict with the Jewish teachings. And Jesus knew that his words would provoke hatred and murderous intent in the scribes and Pharisees. He admonished them anyway. He even called them hypocrites, blind guides, or serpents, Matthew chapter 23. After all, we know Jesus courageously faced the trial, condemnation, and death. The 12 apostles are another examples of religious courage. Let's read about John and Peter, who were arrested and made stand before the High Council. In Acts chapter 4, Acts chapter 4, verses 12 and 13. They said, "Neither is there salvation in any other. For there is none other name under heaven given among men, whereby we must be saved. Now, when they saw the boldness of Peter and John, they saw the boldness of Peter and John, and perceived that they were unlearned and ignorant men, they marveled, and they took knowledge of them that they had been with Jesus. We read the boldness of Peter and John. There is a Greek word, parrhesia, and it means boldness, of course, but also freedom in speaking, fearless confidence, cheerful courage. Throughout the gospel age, there were many, many faithful Christians who faced enemies with religious courage. My wife Esther and me, some years ago, we stood at the place in Constance, in the south of Germany, where 2 stakes were burned. First, 1415 with Jan Hus, with the Czech reformer, and a year later, 1416, with the helper, with his helper, Jerome from Prague. They bravely opposed many aspects of the Catholic Church. And not far from Constance, in Geneva, another hero of faith was burned at the stake, Michael Servetus. He not only opposed the Roman Church, but he had several disputations with the Swiss theologian, John Calvin. Unfortunately, Calvin denounced his stay to the Inquisition, and the courageous Servetus ended his life as a martyr in 1553. Such believers who showed their religious courage could be listed here, their brethren, for hours. But let's continue and talk now about the spheres of activity of courage. Courage operates both in the secular, worldly, or social area, and also in the religious or ecclesiastical or congregational area. First, I would like to give some examples from the secular sphere. We can find courage in the family if, for example, if only one spouse is consecrated to God. It can happen that a husband misunderstands his role and abuses his wife, physically or psychologically. In such adverse circumstances, the consecrated wife must often exercise courage to do the Lord's will. But a wife can also misunderstand her role and constantly rise above her husband. She can be contentious, sarcastic, and can react hysterically or cholerically. In such inconvenient conditions, a consecrated husband must bravely oppose her in order to do the God's will. Sometimes we can show real courage in our workplace when we see various machinations or unjust conduct. We can point this out to our coworkers, our team leader, or even boss, of course, in a polite manner. But our reaction can end in trouble, and maybe we can lose our job. But if we want to have a clear conscience before God and men, we have to say or to do something. A good example was given by an English Christian statesman and member of English Parliament, William Wilberforce. At the turn of the 18th and 19th centuries, he fought effectively against the slave trade. And in August 1833, Parliament passed a bill to free all slaves in the British colonies. And Wilberforce, he died. He died just 1 month before, knowing that the bill has passed its second reading. Courage is also active in the religious sphere. I think this field is significant to us. Many of us took our first Christian steps in different religious communities. And when we abandoned our bad habits or worldly preferences, we were considered eccentric. When we searched for God in the Bible and boldly testified of Him, we even had to leave our churches, our congregations, or classes. Many friends, neighbors, or family members turned away from us. It wasn't easy, but we were able to look forward, courage in all these experiences. After we have been confronted with the parousia and epiphany truth, there are sometimes such circumstances with which our conscience cannot conform. At times, our spiritual father, or elder, or deacon, sister, or brother in our class fall into sin or error. In such situations, courage demands that we oppose them. At first, this can be simple comments, gentle exhortations. Later, we need to have clear and open conversations. And if someone persists in doing so, courage even allows us to part with such a person in spirit of love, of course. I know our human nature tends to avoid such inconveniences, but God likes it when the faithful followers of His Son courageously take a clear position on such matters. Yes, it is true that in our Christian life, we often have to wait for the Lord until we understand His will. We have to be careful. However, it is also true that the Lord's cause is often carried on by His people in these times. We also see the principles of justice being trampled on around us. Should we always say nothing or look away from it? No. It is pleasing to God that we bravely hold up the banner of His righteousness. We also sometimes observe our brothers and sisters being treated unfairly, badly, or even persecuted. Let us also be active in such matters and with courage support and help them. So, dear brethren, let's not be afraid if someone threatened us. Let us not be fearful if someone wants to gain dominance over us. Let us not hesitate when we face our enemy. Resentment and cowardice in the face of danger are the warranty of our defeat, but courage and steadfastness in turn guarantee success. Let us therefore use the biblical courage correctly and reasonably. As our scripture says, be strong and of good courage. And at the end, let's read 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 13 and 14. 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verses 13 and 14. Watch ye, stand fast, in the faith. Quit you like men. Be strong. Let all your things be done with charity. May the Lord bless these thoughts, and thank you for our attention. Thanks.